We are going to begin this morning with President Trump's federal crackdown taking aim at the city of Chicago. Local leaders are bracing for a major immigration operation after Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem confirmed plans to expand ICE enforcement in the city over the weekend. Meanwhile, President Trump has threatened to deploy federal forces there to tackle crime.
Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson signed an executive order Saturday in response. It directs the city's police officers not to collaborate with military personnel on two fronts: police patrols and civil immigration enforcement. Illinois' Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker also weighed in, accusing the Trump administration of keeping Illinois officials in the dark.
No one in the administration, the president or anybody under him, has called anyone in my administration. So it's clear that in secret they're planning this, well, it's an invasion with U.S. troops if they in fact do that.
This follows a violent Labor Day weekend in Chicago. At least 7 people were killed, 53 wounded in shootings across the city. All this as President Trump claims that the nation's capital is now a crime-free zone after he deployed the National Guard to Washington, D.C. last month. Stats show that while the district is not crime-free, crime has dropped there in the past month, especially violent crime. NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos is here to break down how all this could end up playing out in court. First, let's go to NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez, who is in Washington. Gabe, good morning. So which federal agencies are actually expected to mobilize in Chicago in the coming days, and do we know exactly what they'll be doing there?
Hi there, Joe and Savannah. Good morning. Well, 2 federal law enforcement officials tell NBC News that it will be ICE, Border Patrol, and also some other federal agencies that will be in Chicago to expand these operations. And as you mentioned, some of it will be immigration enforcement. We also understand that the federal authorities have secured the use of a naval station on the outskirts of Chicago to act as office space and parking space for some of these agents. And yes, this comes after the president deployed National Guard troops and federalized the D.C. Police Department. He says it has had a significant effect on crime. And in fact, Washington, D.C. Mayor Bowser has also said as much. But there have been concerns here about the federal takeover of D.C. Still in Chicago, the president does not have the same authority, of course, that he has here in the district. So local officials there are concerned about what this could mean moving forward. Joe and Savannah.
Gabe, so yesterday on Labor Day, thousands of people rallied in downtown Chicago. They were protesting the Trump administration's crackdown. Tell us how local officials are reacting to this here, but also what they're doing there if they don't want the feds there to tackle the crime problem there that Joe laid out a moment ago.
Well, you mentioned, Savannah, that Mayor Brandon Johnson over there in Chicago, Democratic mayor, he signed an executive order over the weekend instructing local officials not to collaborate with ICE. Now, this comes after Chicago and other cities across the country have been seen as so-called sanctuary cities. This is what the Trump administration has been trying to fight against. But also there has been some mixed reaction in Chicago. There was one alderman in particular that seems to welcome this federal intervention. Listen to what he had to say.
I had 2 teenagers shot in my community this weekend alone. So when I hear my Democratic colleagues tell me, don't worry, crime is down, Trump stay home in Washington, I have a real hard time accepting that.
Still, though, in addition to the mayor, as you also mentioned in the introduction, Governor J.B. Pritzker is railing against this possible deployment of more federal resources to Illinois. So certainly some mixed reactions there. And you saw the protests yesterday on the streets of Chicago, Johnson.
Gabe, we also know the president is planning to make some kind of announcement later this afternoon. Do we know anything about what he is planning to discuss?
Well, look, this is getting a lot of attention because, for a week now, this is extremely rare that President Trump has not had a scheduled event in front of reporters. He was only seen over the weekend going to his Virginia golf club. But we do understand this morning from a senior White House official that this afternoon's announcement at the White House is set to be focused on defense. That's all we're hearing from the White House at this point. But again, it comes days after the president last week, he only appeared in front of cameras in front of that cabinet meeting, and it's now been a week since he's spoken to reporters.
All right, Gabe Gutierrez, thank you so much.
Let's now bring in Danny Ceballos and break down the legal side of this standoff between the Trump administration and Illinois officials. Danny, good morning. So, Governor Pritzker, he says that if troops arrive in Chicago, he will take legal action against the Trump administration. On what grounds can he do that? And walk us through kind of what control Trump does have over a state like Illinois rather than something like the District of Columbia.
It's a different analysis involving the District of Columbia because District of Columbia is essentially an entire federal district. The president is essentially always in control of the National Guard, at least in theory. To send National Guard troops into another state or to use that state's National Guard troops, the president can federalize them, but only under specific statutory authority. And if he does federalize them, it's a little bit of an open question whether he can send them in without the governor's consent. But the Posse Comitatus Act is a law that prevents those guardsmen from performing direct law enforcement. In other words, policing directly is traditionally the power of the state, not the federal government. But they can assist in other things. For example, assist ICE in their missions. They can protect federal property. So as long as they're acting within a statutory authority, then they can be in there and presumably without governor consent.
Let's talk about this executive order from Mayor Johnson. He's directing the city's law department to use, quote, every legal mechanism to try to stop President Trump's potential plans. What could that look like?
It would look like lawsuits. It would not look like physical opposition. It's more likely to be filing suit in court to try and stop this, which you really don't need an executive order to do. You can just do it. You can just file those actions and get a judge to try to enter an injunction. Now, where it gets really tricky is what judge. You have to go to a federal judge, I would expect, and then you have to get an injunction, which is very difficult. But look, an unintended consequence of a Trump administration is that an area of constitutional law that has traditionally been gray will now be sketched out or decided by a court.
Also, we want to ask you about the matter of immigration enforcement. A couple days ago, this federal judge in Washington state had blocked the Trump administration from being able to deport these hundreds of unaccompanied minors back to their home country of Guatemala. The administration had said it was this attempt to reunite families. But walk us through what exactly is going on here, why the judge sided with the attorneys representing these kids and what it ultimately meant. Because some of them, as you're seeing on your screen right now, were already on planes.
Right. So the argument that the attorneys for the children made essentially is that children are treated differently under the law. Yes, there are expedited removal procedures, but when it comes to children, there's another law, the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act, or the TVPRA. It actually, the criminal side of that statute was recently used to prosecute Sean Diddy Combs. So it's a very expansive statute. This separate section provides for protections for children, procedural protections. In other words, they get certain rights that adults might not in the removal process. And the argument was they weren't given those procedures. I caution that they may still get those procedures, the children, and it may eventually result in their removal. But at least on this emergency basis, the children, or the court concluded that the children were entitled to those protections, and that's at least why they put a pause. And that's really all this is an immediate emergency pause to preserve the status quo and make sure some irreparable harm doesn't happen.
Danny Ceballos, thank you as always.
Congress returns today after a one-month break, and lawmakers will need to tackle a list of pressing issues.
Yeah, from funding the government to the lingering concerns surrounding the Jeffrey Epstein case, lawmakers are expected to have their work cut out for them over the next few weeks.
NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Melanie Zanona joins us now. Mel, perhaps the biggest task facing lawmakers, stop me if you've heard this before, funding the federal government. Those funds expected to run out, I know, by the end of the month. So where do things stand right now on that front? And what are going to be some of the biggest challenges facing lawmakers this time around?
Yeah, good morning, guys. It is only the first day back for Congress, and we are already on shutdown watch. And that is because they only have a few weeks to come to an agreement. They haven't done so yet. And there are already some major red flags, some major warning signs about how this is all going to come together. But what it really boils down to is whether Democrats are going to put up the votes and essentially bail Republicans out because they need Democratic votes, at least in the Senate, to get this done. Now, earlier this year, Chuck Schumer did allow him and some other Senate Democrats Democrats to provide the votes, and essentially they did bail Republicans out and funded the government. But Schumer got a lot of flack from his base over that. They really want to see their Democratic leadership fighting Trump, sticking it to the Trump administration. And there's been a lot of dynamic changes since that moment as well. I mean, just look at the last week, some of the controversial actions that Trump has taken, really riling up, especially Democratic members of Congress, from firing the head of the CDC to even this more recent move, which is something called a pocket rescissions. Essentially, the White House deciding to cancel funding that had already been approved by Congress without seeking their congressional approval. So Democrats are sitting there wondering, why would they agree to fund the government if Trump is just going to do whatever he wants? So all of these going to be huge dynamics that we need to watch over the next few weeks, but definitely barreling towards a real showdown at the end of the month here, guys.
Mel, the other issue here, the Jeffrey Epstein case, I mean, that is expected to cast the shadow over Washington once again this week. What is the latest?
Yeah, we could see some pretty explosive moments on Capitol Hill this week. That is because we're expecting to hear from some of these survivors and victims of Jeffrey Epstein's sexual abuse. First up today, a group of victims are going to meet privately with the House Oversight Committee. It's going to be a bipartisan meeting with Republicans and Democrats, but those victims want to remain private. So afterwards, we are expecting to hear from some of the lawmakers. They're going to come out on the steps and do what's known as a press gaggle. But tomorrow, there's going to be a different group of some of these survivors. 10 of them is what we're hearing, who have never spoken out publicly before, that are going to appear at a public press conference to tell their tales. We are hearing that could potentially be a really just explosive, powerful moment. And the reason why this matters, guys, is because there's an effort, a bipartisan effort on Capitol Hill to force a floor vote on a resolution that would essentially release all of the Epstein files from the government immediately and without redactions. They need the support of 218 members of Congress, though. The thinking, though, is once they hear from some of these victims, there's going to be a real flood of members who want to sign on to that resolution. So that's something we're watching as well.
And Mel, we are going to dig into this next topic more in just a moment, but we obviously expect Congress to push for answers about what we're seeing at the CDC, the turnover, the administration's deeply controversial approach to vaccines. What can we expect to see with Congress back now?
Yeah, well, the secretary is actually going to be testifying on Capitol Hill this week. That is a hearing that was already in the works prior to the shakeup at the CDC. He's going to appear before the Senate Finance Committee later this week. But of course, this is going to be an opportunity for senators to really grill him on not only the firing of the CDC director and some of the high-profile departures that followed, but also his own views on vaccines and some of his anti-vaccine rhetoric. I'm particularly interested in what Bill Cassidy is going to say. He's a Republican who sits on that committee. He also chairs the Health Committee. He provided a pivotal confirmation vote for Kennedy, despite having some concerns about the secretary. And since then, Kennedy has broken a number of promises that he directly made to people like Cassidy. So the question is whether Republicans still have confidence in the secretary and if they're going to do anything about it. So just a huge, huge week on Capitol Hill, guys.
No kidding. We'll keep you busy. Mel, thank you.
And that's where we turn now, is to that turmoil inside the Centers for Disease Control. It is continuing to grow. 9 former CDC heads wrote a scathing op-ed in the New York Times blasting the current health secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., for his vaccine skepticism, which they say is risking lives. This comes as confusion is growing over new COVID vaccine guidelines. We have our NBC News medical contributor, Dr. Kavita Patel, with us to walk us through exactly what this means. Dr. Patel, good morning. Always great to have you with us. So, I mean, first, just walk us through your big concerns. And if you could lay out here what we heard from these former heads of the CDC, essentially coming together in the New York Times to express their deep concerns about what they're seeing.
Yeah, I think at the core of their concerns, Savannah and Joe, were that basically the CDC no longer can be trusted because of how the Trump administration has treated, or at least not treated, the leadership, i.e. not listening to its leaders, not having the data, not letting the science come forward, and even replacing. This started months ago, and the directors pointed that out, that this started months ago with the replacement of the Advisory Commission on Immunization Practices, or ACIP. And that's now led to where we are today, where it is incredibly confusing because you have the Food and Drug Administration, which is saying, unless you're over 65 or have high-risk conditions or are very, very young, you really don't need the COVID vaccine. And in fact, they're kind of attributing it to getting rid of COVID mandates when there are no mandates at this point in time. And it's spilling over now because of different states' regulations around who can give the vaccine and under what guidance. It's spilling over into over a dozen states where patients just can't get it either without a prescription or not at all until they get further guidance. So the country is in a patchwork for this respiratory virus season as of today.
A lot of people are keeping an eye on what the president says about this. So yesterday there was a post to Truth Social. He demanded that pharmaceutical companies release data on the success of what he's calling their COVID drugs, not vaccines. He said drugs to, quote, clear up this mess at the CDC. So first, what do we know about how effective COVID shots have been over the past few years? And no matter what that data shows, with a vaccine skeptic heading HHS, do you think pharmaceutical companies will have much influence here?
Yeah, great question. So some of them that we are going to have to watch and play out. So let's talk about the efficacy and effectiveness. Efficacy refers to the kind of basically how well the vaccines work during those clinical trials. And you remember, it was actually under Trump where Operation Warp Speed and the ability to do these clinical trials, not fast, they weren't cutting corners, but it was the ability to recruit literally around the globe millions of people to be in these trials. But those trials showed the vaccine was effective. Different versions of the vaccines from different manufacturers had effectiveness, efficacy in the 90s. That's pretty high for a vaccine. And then in the real world, we see effectiveness, and that's also been reproduced to be in the 90s. What does that mean? It means that it has a 90% chance of reducing your risk for hospitalization, for death, and from severe consequences compared to not taking anything. So that's been shown now in almost billions of cases of people getting vaccines around the world, really. So there shouldn't be any question. And then as to drugs, there aren't that many drugs for COVID. We've got basically several antiviral drugs, same statistics around high numbers that would pass any threshold for the Food and Drug Administration. In fact, what's weird is the Food and Drug Administration basically just last week doubled down and said that this is a safe vaccine and it's effective. They just put those restrictions on the age. So very confusing messaging, not just from the CDC director, FDA, HHS, but also from the president.
Dr. Patel, our viewers might not know that you have a deep background in public health policy. You worked in the Obama White House. You know some of the people that wrote this op-ed. You've been in the same realm as them professionally for quite some time. If you could just sort of put in context so that we can understand, viewers at home can understand, just how concerned you think these former leaders are, maybe you know from speaking to them, to get together and make such a public statement in this manner.
I do. I've thankfully and gratefully, humbly worked with many of them through different administrations. By the way, you see people representing decades of experience in that New York Times op-ed. And I can tell you, not easy to get CDC directors across that many decades and that many administrations to come together and have such a common message. And I should tell the American public that because of that rarity, you really should sit up and listen. It doesn't matter what the publication is. It doesn't matter what the outlet is, but the message is the same, that the trust in the CDC has eroded and that action has to be taken now. I think one of the most concerning sentences in that op-ed was that we're basically on our own, that we have to work together to take care of each other as a community. And I know those CDC directors, and they would never have come to this point unless they were pushed over the brink, because there really is there's a brotherhood, a sisterhood that happens amongst these directors. They only have been in each other's shoes. So They understand how hard the job is. But that just shows you where we are today. It's very concerning.
We were speaking with a relative last night who was just deeply confused about what to do about a COVID shot, whether it's going to be covered, where to get it, and we don't have a lot of answers right now. I'm guessing you're hearing from patients right now who are also confused and have a lot of questions. What is your advice to people right now who are trying to figure this out?
Right. First and foremost is just think about layered protection while you're also trying to search simultaneously for where to get the vaccine. Layered protection, all the things we talk about, crowded spaces. It's okay to bring out a mask. Also thinking about washing your hands if you have symptoms, to kind of stay away from people till those symptoms resolve, fevers go away. Meanwhile, get on a website. Almost everybody has a physician who has kind of a portal on their website. So that those have information. But you can also go to the retail pharmacies, which have been putting up information and kind of let you put in your name, your date of birth, what zip code you're in, and then it does kind of spit out explicit advice. There are COVID vaccines available in many parts of the country, but again, with some of those restrictions, 65 or older, or you need to self-attest in many cases, meaning check that you have one of the following list of high-risk conditions. Keep in mind, those high-risk conditions are broad and expansive. I encourage viewers and listeners to actually read through, because you probably qualify. Much of America does. So try to actually act now. You can also call our offices. People are we may or may not be able to figure out how to get you the vaccine because we don't have them in our offices just yet around many parts of the country. But the pharmacies and doctors' offices are starting to get them. In terms of cost, ask your doctor, but we are also trying to verify with insurance. And ultimately, that's the place we're going to go to. We're going to have to send that bill in. We're going to probably ask you to sign a waiver that if the insurance company doesn't cover it, we might need to send you a bill. We're looking at about $100 to $140 out-of-pocket cost. But ask these questions first so you don't get surprised.
All right, Dr. Kavita Patel, important stuff this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Today, 22 million people from Washington state to California are under heat alerts where daytime temps in some spots could reach nearly 110 degrees. On Sunday, storms brought flooding to the Midwest and Texas, where 2 people were killed Sunday. Those storms halted flights in Dallas on a busy travel holiday. A record 17.4 million travelers passed through TSA security checkpoints over Labor Day weekend. NBC News correspondent Dana Griffin has the details.
Travel woes for some passengers this Labor Day. At Newark Liberty International, dozens of delays and a ground stop, the FAA citing staffing. Another ground stop at Reagan National due to volume. And at Dallas-Fort Worth, flights halted because of weather. The TSA expected to screen 17.4 million passengers returning home from Labor Day weekend. Out west, a different holiday challenge for LA County lifeguards.
They're going to be out on the sand looking for rip currents and people in distress.
Nearly 600 rescues over the weekend as dangerous rip currents and elevated surf impact beaches.
We've seen periods of these massive waves breaking at least 6 feet. This is adding to the danger.
The power of the wave is very, very impressive.
Families undeterred by conditions, but keeping a close watch.
It's very easy for a little child to disappear.
Across the West, hot temperatures impacting 25 million people, some states seeing 10 to 20 degrees above average. While in Texas, police say 2 people were killed and a third missing during flash flooding on Sunday that left drivers stranded and rivers swollen. In San Antonio, a man had to be rescued by raft. Back in California, when swimmers get this warning,
We'll go out and just talk to those people, make sure they're safe, bring them back in, and then redirect them into a safer location.
All right, well, it looks like there's another scorching hot day on the way for the West Coast this morning.
Yeah, NBC meteorologist Angie Lassman joins us with the forecast. What can we expect, Angie?
Hi, guys. Good morning. We can expect some warm temperatures out west. We've got 19 million people under these heat alerts. Notice where you see the heat warnings, though. It's mainly focused across parts of the Pacific Northwest, where we once again are going to be running warmer than normal, but also taking a stab at some record warmth across that region. We've got high 90s expected in Boise, low 90s expected in Billings. Even across parts of Southern California, we're going to be running at least 5 to 10 degrees above normal. Farther east, specifically across the middle of the country and along the East Coast, we're cooler than normal. So temperatures in Kansas City really just going to top out into the upper 70s, a little below average for this time of year, but we really start to get a dose of what fall feels like across parts of the upper Midwest and the northern plains as we get into tomorrow. Just 64 degrees for your high temperature in Minneapolis tomorrow. Of course, cooler in the morning hours. Omaha reaches a high temperature of low 70s. It's still going to be hot out west, so you're still going to see temperatures into the 80s and 90s for our folks across the Pacific Northwest, but we'll start to see some of these kind of milder fall afternoons settling in, especially for places like Chicago as we round out the work week. Mid 60s to upper 60s as we head from Thursday through Saturday. Meanwhile, big picture look of what you can expect for the week ahead. Here's today. We've got those mild highs and a whole lot of sunshine for most of the East Coast. Just a couple of spots that are going to deal with some of that rain. It's parts of the South, parts of Florida, and then some of these thunderstorms as a cold front works through across parts of the upper Midwest. You'll notice those thunderstorms ramping up into the afternoon hours. And then we look ahead to Thursday, more of these showers and thunderstorms shifting off to the east. So places like the Kentucky Valley and then inching into parts of the interior Northeast are going to see some of that rain. And we'll also have the potential for some of these monsoon storms to pop up across parts of the the Southwest. How about that? Try it for a third time. All right, that flood threat stays with us on Friday. It'll be quite hot in the South, guys. 90s on tap along the Gulf Coast, and even parts of the Mid-Atlantic will see temperatures quite warm, mid-80s to upper 80s by the time we finish out our work week. But the cool air, the fall air, will be in place for the Midwest.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.